Like and subscribe and click the bell icon to get new video updates.
Authoritarian nostalgia. Philippines seem set to return Marcoses to power. Ferdinand Marcos Jr leads polls despite father's dictatorship and energetic opposition campaign. The color they are clad in is an unmissable shade of fuchsia pink. They walk the streets across the Philippines, waving banners along the way and stopping anyone who will listen. Many are young or first-time voters, and some travel for hours to join campaign teams. For them, next week's election is a make-or-break moment for their country. "I really want change," says Mariel Ramirez, 35, a first-time voter who is among those campaigning. The impact of the pandemic on the poorest, and the prospect of the return to office of one of the country's most controversial families, the Marcoses, drove her to act. "It's so obvious that a Marcos presidency would really just bring the country to its lowest point," said Ramirez. "They're a family who just enrich themselves. There are just days left until more than 67 million Filipinos vote for their next president in a highly contentious election." Ferdinand Marcos Jr., known as Bongbong, or BBM, and the son of the former dictator Ferdinand Marcos, is leading in opinion polls, despite his late father's notorious history of corruption and rights abuses. Leni Robredo and her army of nearly 2 million volunteers, known as Kakampinks, Pink Allies, are trying to stop Marcos Jr. Robredo, a human rights lawyer who has advocated for disadvantaged groups and is the current vice president, is trailing second in the polls by a significant margin. In an election where online misinformation is rife, her supporters have launched a door-to-door effort that is unusual in its scale. In Sampaloc, a deprived district of Manila, some residents are receptive. Josie Loyola, 70, who sits outside her house in the morning sunshine, smiles as she spots the campaigners passing by. "She is good-hearted, she has a lot of accomplishments," Loyola says of Robredo. But she lowers her voice when she speaks of Marcos Jr. "He is really questionable, he has questionable integrity." She worries about political instability, or a repeat of martial law, which was imposed by Marcos Jr in 1972. Human rights violations were rife during the 9-year period of martial law. 3,240 people were killed, while tens of thousands more were tortured and imprisoned, according to Amnesty International. Loyola's son, who is crouched beside a tub of soapy water, stays focused on scrubbing his motorbike. "He is undecided," he says. "Not everyone wants to talk." A few doors down, images of a smiling Marcos Jr., holding his hand in a peace sign, are plastered onto a house. It was 36 years ago that the People Power Revolution brought an end to Marcos's 20-year rule, forcing the family to flee into exile. They fled by helicopter, stashing board items worth $15 million, £12 million, including gold bars, freshly printed cash and hundreds of pieces of jewelry. It was small change compared with the overall estimates of the family's ill-gotten wealth. Some suggest as much as £8 billion was plundered by the family. Marcos Jr died in 1989, but the rest of the family was allowed to return to the Philippines in the 1990s, and it has been slowly rebranding itself ever since. Our democratic transition did not go through a process of transitional justice, unlike other countries that went through political or civil strife, says Julio Teehankee, professor of political science and international studies at Salle University in Manila. Instead, the Marcoses were given a warm reception by the powerful, says Teehankee. The society elites, the circles, embraced them and treated them as celebrities. The family began to re-establish their position in politics and cement allegiances. In 2016, Marcos Jr was given a hero's burial with military honors on the recommendation of President Rodrigo Duterte. Marcos survivors were appalled and warned history was being whitewashed. Duterte's daughter Sarah is Marcos Jr.'s running mate. Observers say the failure of the Philippine education system to properly discuss the reality of the Marcos rule has created a gap in public knowledge, especially among younger generations, which the Marcos Jr.'s camp has exploited. Online, Social media accounts linked to or supportive of the Marcoses downplay the dictatorship and seek to justify or even deny past abuses by spreading misinformation. They present the Marcos years as a golden era, a time when the economy was thriving, when infrastructure was developed, and there was peace and order. The human rights abuses and kleptocracy are swept aside. Salle Inductivo, 35, who lives across from Loyola, stands over a simmering pot, preparing lunch for her family, as volunteers pass. She will vote for Marcos Jr., she says. During martial law, if you were a decent citizen, you did not have anything to be afraid of. Her mother, who